we've already made 26 films, 26 sections to the film Responsive Communication, and we need to add another couple to sort of update things, things which have interested us since making the film and which have actually been researched since making the film. So there'll now be 2 extra, there'll be 28 in total instead of 26. What I really want to address both of them come under the heading of feeling. But there's a problem when we talk about feeling, because it can, both in common parlance, but also in research papers, people are not always clear when they're talking about feeling whether they're talking about sensation or emotion.
Or even a thought.
Yes.
I feel that you shouldn't have said that.
And
yes,
it is making things unclear, so that we don't pretend to be experts on this. We are trying to look at things which are interesting us at the minute.
Yes, I think that's exactly it. We are not experts on this. We are not the researchers in this. But what has come to light in the last couple of years, some really good research papers about interoception, seems to have shed some light on why we know the things that we know work when we're supporting people who struggle with communication for a whole range of reasons.
So we're going to start, well, we've already dealt with exteroception in that this is related to vision and hearing and touch. No, sorry, not touch. Vision and hearing and taste, smell, whatever. But we're going to go on now, and I'm going to start off by talking about proprioception, which is about where the body is in space. And also it relates to balance as well. Some time ago, I was thinking about this, and 2 of the people I was working with were telling me that when they were feeling upset, they started to scrunch their toes against the inside of their trainers in order to give themselves bigger feedback than they were getting already.
And were they aware they were doing it to get bigger feedback?
They were doing it when I pointed out, and then they said, "Oh yes, I always do that, you know." And so I went away and thought about that, and came up with the idea that actually they might be helped, some of them, by textured insoles.
So there was something more to scrunch against.
Something more to scrunch against, like that. Now, I tried various models, and eventually I used these Revs insoles because I found they met most of the criteria which we needed. Oh, and you can cut these insoles down to size with a pair of scissors. There is a rather high arch which some people find difficult. It's very easy to file this down with a power file if you need to, but what they're really interested in is the bit here. What we're doing is we're upping the feedback, turning up the volume of the feedback that they're giving themselves, because a lot of people on the autistic spectrum are not getting the messages from the feet to the brain, or in fact any part of the body, which are telling them what they're doing, which is what proprioceptive messages do. But that may be partly because it's drowned, the messages get there to the brain, but they're drowned by anxiety, or partly that there's actually an issue, there's an actual break in the continuity. So I want first to have a look at what happened. We tried these with about 12 people, and these were all people who were low on proprioception. So they were banging their heads on the walls, or they were running around. Particularly they were slamming their feet on the ground or scrunching their toes. And I'd like to read you some of the feedback that we had from these people. The first is by a woman who features in, she's written a chapter in our book, Responsive Communication, if I can hold that one up. Hope. And
Hope Light Water?
Light Towler. And she says, the ridge cells are incredibly helpful. They help to ground me. I can actually feel my feet for once in my shoes. The only time I used to feel my feet was when I was in pain with them, or if I was wearing uncomfortable shoes. That meant I would purposely use these sometimes. I don't now feel like a floating head as I used to, or my feet don't turn to jelly, which only leads to clumsiness and feeling weird. I like my feet to feel things, especially the ground. The insoles also help when going into overload. As before, when I was getting overloaded, I would scrunch up my toes, but I now understand my body was trying to grasp onto something and get that much needed feeling I required. Without this, I'd continue to spiral further into overload and panic. But now it almost brings me back to where I am and stops me from getting overloaded. It helps calm me down, and it helps stopping overload from occurring in the first place.
What I find fascinating about this is here is a young woman who was aware of feeling like a floating head. She was aware of feeling like that.
I think is the absolute extraordinary thing, which I don't think anybody's noted before, this disconnection with the ground.
Donna Williams talked about it in a couple of her books.
Oh, does she?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd forgotten
and I think Iris Johansson sort of mentions it as well, that feeling of disembodiment, that I'm not hanging together as a body. Now these are all
not
people
in connection with the ground.
Not in connection with the ground.
Or the body, or the world around.
Yeah, or myself, my feeling of myself. Yes. And these are all people who can articulate what they're feeling. And they have come up with their own ways. You know, Hope very clearly describes her scrunching of her toes in her shoes. Yeah. They've come up with a sort of a socially invisible way of coping with that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think of all the people that we support at Us in a Bus who don't have language to explain what they're feeling and don't have a concept of what is a socially acceptable hidden behaviour to counteract what they're feeling. And of course what they do gets seen as a behaviour, which is a very strange word to use with other adults.
I have to say that I've tried this with one chap, that's Hope's brother, and he is non-verbal. And he was very shy, and he when Hope had to put them on him in his trainers, and the first thing he did was he looked up and he gave me an enormous grin. And so you know, he was capable of communicating
the difference.
The difference.
Yes.
Grace is a professional artist who happens to have autism, and she told me she has twitchy toes, and that when she felt herself starting to overload, she deliberately wrinkled her toes inside her shoes, and the sensation gave her something to focus on when everything was falling apart. She said, the textured rubber material insoles in my shoes has made a massive difference to my twitchy toes and nerves. I was very surprised something so simple could work. The best way I can explain the way they work is it's like texture of tough, stretchy rubber massages my feet while I'm walking.
So she's getting a constant sensory message.
Yes, exactly. One that is sufficiently strong for her to feel. I wouldn't go back to wearing shoes without them now. This is extremely interesting. This is a very, very articulate man who's a trainer who has autism, written several books, Paul Isaacs. And he said, wore the insoles at work today. This is the first time he wore them, actually, because most people take 2 or 3 weeks to get used to them, and they need to start with sort of 20 minutes and then work up. He said, I have a better sense of body connectivity, a better stride, gait and locomotion. My posture is improved. Feet placement is softer and I'm not slamming my feet on the ground. and my hemiplegia has greatly benefited.
Wow.
So that's
why?
amazing.
So what is integrating? What's the sensory message that is integrating for him, that is helping his hemiplegia?
Well, just that he can feel them,
Yeah.
that he feels in connection.
Yes.
And so it's almost as if his whole sensory system has gone shunt. Here's Richard. The insoles took some time getting used to, and I was nearly going to trim down the insteps as they felt uncomfortable. However, day 2, the insoles settled into their final position, and my shoes are now comfortable, and I'm wearing the insoles unmodified. I wasn't expecting the effect they give. Through greater proprioceptive input on my feet, I'm walking with a much smoother gait, not striking my feet on the ground so hard. I've noticed my less ankle and knee discomfort. I cycle a lot, and at first experienced discomfort, but it settled down. The bike I've been riding has flat pedals, and I notice a change. I've a better sense through my feet that they're resting on pedals. I've been able to moderate my cycling effort more closely. It's interesting that when Richard is giving a talk, and he again is a trainer, he has to, he will spend time leaning against the wall, but he also has to carry a camera, so there's a weight. And he says the best time is when he's on his bike, because he's got 5 points of contact: his hands, his groin, and his feet. And that's when he feels most centered.
So I've seen him on stage giving a talk, and he has his bike with him, and he's leaning on his bike. You can always see it.
Even having it there is a help.
Yeah.
Because we don't realise how disembodied these people feel.
Well, no, and that's the point, I think, for me, about thinking our understanding of behaviour. Again, we see people stamping and striding and jumping, and now we know enough to understand that this is people who are hyposensitive to proprioceptive feedback and are seeking it out. And if something as simple as a bit of rubber with knobbles on it can actually save somebody from having to spend all that energy and the potential damage to their joints over years and years, I think that's a bit revolutionary.
One would say, one must say, it doesn't cure the autism.
No, thank you.
What it does do is modify some of the one or two of the more unpleasant sensations, and therefore they are calmer.
Yes, I would hate anybody to go away with the idea that this cures autism.
No, it doesn't.
Or that reflexology does, because of course these are sold as reflexology insoles, and we're not suggesting for a minute this is making no value judgment on reflexology.
No, right.
It's not reflexology we're talking about. It's simply appropriate scrunchy pressure where somebody needs it.
Right
yes,
place, Yes, it's revs insoles.
And you're saying that actually that could be
shaved
down with a power, what did you call it?
A power file.
A power file.
But you have to be very careful, because otherwise it's just a bit too much. It comes off very easily. It does need to be tight against. Really, you need the insoles so you can put them in the trainers. And most of them wear trainers anyway.
I think when we're talking about using these with somebody who doesn't have the cognitive ability to tell them how they are, to tell us how they're responding to them, it's our responsibility to really be watching for their response.
Yes, it's a question of behaviour.
Yes, absolutely, because somebody that I know who tried these out, who could tell me what was going on, said that she suddenly felt they were too much and she had to take them out. So we've got a responsibility not to think, that's cured the problem, but to be constantly looking at what they need now.
They have to take them out and then they go and put them back.
Yes.
Running is not good. I've had 2 people say running on them, it really is too much. Now I want to switch slightly, because not everybody, this increasing the feedback is on the feet. It can also be on the hands. And I've had people say, they're nice on my hands. So I thought, suppose you could keep something in your pocket which you could just feel all the time. And the solution appears to be so simple: hair colours.
So we have raided our
We
collection of hair
I raided
curlers.
in my hairdresser, and you produced this one, which is very good. And they need to be sufficient. You can get that in smaller.
We can get that
yes.
small. It needs to be something that you can fit in your pocket.
Yes, it does.
But something
indeed.
that also fits your palm. So this is
Yes,
going to be
exactly.
so personal, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But we were talking that maybe the sound of that might be annoying to somebody, even if it was in their pocket. If they were sensitive to sound, the feel might be good, but the sound might not be. And something like that is silent.
They're very lightweight
Yeah.
and they go in the pocket.
Yeah.
So we're going to try these out, but they really are very simple. And again, you know, if palms of your hands are the thing, which gives you better feedback, the whole thing centres around: can we turn up the volume of the sensory feedback they're getting,
Yes.
so that it either overrides the anxiety or it simply jumps the gap, or
Yes,
whatever it
yes.
is.
The other question is about hands and more related to this sensation. You've had some success supporting people to use gripper gloves inside out, because they have sort of nodules on the hands.
But it's hot and it's
yes.
not comfy.
Yeah.
This is why I was looking further.
Yes.
These are I would say that one is probably the, it's not too sharp. That one's very sharp. And I do like this one personally. I think
It's
this
just
is
Velcro,
great.
yes. Yeah, yeah.
It's sort of Velcro, yeah.
You can keep it, Phoebe.
Oh. Well, actually, I'm going to see someone, so it may be just a thing, although she does like pink.
There's another couple of quotes here about the textured insoles. Both of these quotes are in Phoebe's book, Phoebe's latest book, Responsive Communication. Right, the first quote is from Richard Maguire. He says, "The insoles arrived and I'm on day 3 of using them. They took some getting used to and I was nearly going to trim down the insept areas as they felt uncomfortable. However, on day 2, the insoles settled into their final position in my shoes and are now comfortable, and I'm using the insoles unmodified. I was not expecting the effect they give. Through giving greater proprioceptive input on my feet, I'm walking with a smoother gait and not striking my feet on the ground so hard. I've noticed less ankle and knee discomfort as a result. I cycle lots and at first experienced discomfort. Like with walking, on day 2 the insoles settled and cycling is now easier. The bicycle I've been riding has flat pedals and I notice a change. I have a better sense through my feet that they are resting on the pedals. I've been able to moderate my cycling effort more closely. I've been aware of doing less toe crunching as well. Tomorrow I'll be driving for a few hours and it will be interesting what effect the insoles have then. I'll let you know." The other quote is from Paul Isaacs. Paul Isaacs is an autistic trainer, speaker, consultant and blogger. He's co-authored several books including Life Through a Kaleidoscope. "Dear Phoebe, I wore the insoles at work today. This is what I've noticed. A better sense of body connectivity, a better stride, gait and locomotion. Posture improved. Feet placement less softer, not slamming my feet on the ground, trying to get input. My hemiplegia has greatly benefited, my right side. Many thanks."
This next section we're going to talk about interoception, which is all the things that come in from our body, but you're going to tell us more about that. And just before we start, I want to make a distinction between affect and effect, because we use them quite often.
And they constantly confuse me.
And they constantly confuse me too. Affect, with an A, has to do with emotion, and effect is the things you do. It affects something. So that's a very, very rough distinction. Do you disagree?
No, I agree. I need all the help I can on that front.
Yes, so do I. I always get it wrong. And so, if you'd like to start by telling us what you think interoception
I'll
is.
start by saying why I'm so interested in talking with you about this, Phoebe, because to me, the more we find out about interoception, the more good, solid scientific evidence there is for why what we do with intensive interaction and the way
works.
Yes, why it works.
Yeah.
This is why it works. You know, our experience over 20, 30, 40 years is that this works.
Yes.
And now, this is why it works. And that's what I want to explore with you.
Yeah.
And my really basic understanding of interoception is that it's another sense, basically. It's the sensory messages we get from our visceral organs, our internal organs.
Our heart.
Our bladder, our bowel, our lungs, the whole shebang.
The whole works.
Yes, yeah. And we all know that we get messages from our internal organs that are related to how we are feeling. And by feeling, I mean how we are, our emotional state. And so if my heart is fluttering quickly, maybe I'm scared, maybe I'm being chased by a lion.
Well, you're being told you're scared. Your brain is being told you're scared.
Well, okay.
That's what.
Or it's telling me I'm excited. Because
Well, what I mean is it's a message from the heart to the brain. It's not the other way around.
Well, this is what we're beginning to understand, and I'm saying
told.
that traditionally we've known, okay, my heart is beating faster, or I'm excited, or I'm scared, and I use my my understanding of my environment to tell me what's going on. So I'm looking around. No, I'm not being chased by a lion, so I'm not scared. But Bruce Springsteen has just walked on stage, and I'm really excited. So that, you know, the situation tells me what my heart is telling me. Those two things come together.
Yeah.
My understanding of my environment, my history, if you like. You know, because last time Bruce Springsteen walked on stage, I was quite excited as well. My history tells me what my visceral messages are. So there's that sort of coming together of information.
What we're learning now, however, is that the brain is receiving the messages, and it is telling the heart to pound, and then the heart is pounding, and we have the emotions linked to that.
And this is an
the
incredibly
order is slightly different.
Yes, but it's an incredibly quick and linked thing that our brain is doing for us.
It's more or less instantaneous.
Yeah. But if we're just regarding, if to strip it back to its simplicity, if we're thinking, interoception is a sense, and like other senses, like our sense of hearing and our visual processing, if that can be misprocessed, then there's no reason to believe that interoceptive messages can't be misprocessed. So that helps us understand behaviour, and I think this for me is the exciting link. When we understand more about interoception, we understand why somebody who can't explain is behaving as they are behaving, in the same way of proprioception and all those other processing issues. It helps us try and understand behaviour. And one of the things it helps us understand is our sense of who we are. I need my interoceptive sense to remind me who I am. It is constantly, my visceral system is giving me my sense of self. Now, if that was misprocessing, I would not have a clear sense of who I am at any given time, which would also render me not very good at understanding other people, understanding the concept of other. If I haven't got a concept of self, I'm struggling with a concept of other, which would render me at a disadvantage in any social exchange. I'm thinking about people who don't even have words here. So it makes sense to me of why intensive interaction works. When we copy back to somebody what they're doing, it allows them to know that we've noticed them. It confirms their sense of self, which in turn gives them an opportunity to explore other. So socially, that's the groundwork. And that's what I want to explore with you, because there's so many different levels to this.
Well, as
levels
you said,
of
there are
understanding.
so many different levels. what happens is that, say I receive a message from my bowel or my, and also I'm receiving messages of the film which is being shot, or and Janet, who's I'm talking to, is that those messages go to the brain, and they are integrated, not with just what's happening now, but also all the stuff that's happened before, which relates to it, all the history, in a part of the brain, a small part of the brain called the insula. And I like to think of the insula as a sort of map room, where the electrical signals which come in the form that's how the messages come in, are translated into from a map, an ordnance map, to a relief map, so that you get an overall vision of what's happening. And I find this is helpful. And then they're passed on to something else called the anterior cingulate cortex, which...
Can you say that again for me? The anterior...
cingulate cortex.
Cingulate cortex.
Which decides what to do.
So the insula has integrated all the signals and the history and information, and then send a message to the anterior cingulate cortex.
I'm not sure quite at which stage the sort of history bit comes in. I think the thing I want to say is that this is immensely complicated.
Yes.
The research is ongoing, and therefore we can only sort of try and give some sort of simplification of it.
What we can do also, at the end of this film, there will be links to some brilliant research by Sarah Garfinkel and Manos Tsoukaris. I'm sorry if I haven't pronounced his name correctly. But what we're doing is trying to relate that to our practice and what we know and what we understand and what we can do with people.
So how can we pick up the emotions of other people? You know, that's a really extraordinary thing. And Garfunkel talks about some research in her TED talk, which we've give you the link to, about they put a tracker on the heart of both firewalkers and observers.
So we've got people walking over hot coals, and we've got the people who are watching their loved ones walking over hot. Okay, and they're both rigged up to separate heart monitors.
Yeah. And what she finds is that the observer, how the heart of the firewalker accelerates and decelerates is mirrored by the observers. They're the same. The tracking is.
Yes.
Mirroring.
So one is having the experience of hot coals, the other is watching it, but the emotional response in terms of the heartbeat and the rate of the heartbeat is identical.
So the heartbeat is reflected in the body language.
Yeah.
Because if I'm frightened, or if I'm excited, that is going to be reflected in my body language. So the other person picks up the body language, the observer, and feels it themselves. Now, how on earth do they do that? This is where it gets really interesting.
Well, it is, isn't it? And I think if we take a less dramatic thing, because that's dramatic, and you can think, because they're scared for their loved one, because their loved one is walking on hot coals. But if we, there's the other bit of research, which is about the size of pupils.
That's right, absolutely.
And do you want to say something about that?
Well, what they've done there is they've shown people a whole range of emotions, and then eventually they boiled
faces showing different emotions,
and they boiled it down to sadness. And what they found was that the sadder the person was, the smaller
the pupils become. So if I'm really sad, my pupils are tiny.
Okay?
Yes.
But then they started measuring the pupils of the observer, and found that their pupils had also contracted.
Even when the observer was simply looking at a picture of somebody who was sad with small pupils.
This had sort of big implications for intensive interaction, both with people with autism and with people with profound disability who's having difficulty in communicating.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the question is, how do we pick up messages from, how do we pick up the body language? And how, in that case, do we actually feel what they feel inside us? Because it's not just a question. One of the things that doesn't work, there's so many self-help manuals, you know, if a person is sitting with their legs crossed, it means X, Y, and Z. That is cognitive. It is maybe sympathy with that person. But how is it that when you're using intensive interaction, you actually feel that person's...
And that is a two-way track as well.
Well, hang on for that for a minute. I think it's important because we need to know how it is that we feel.
Yes.
So I suggest that what happens is that I look at the camera. Well, I look at the person who's operating, Imogen, who's operating the camera, and I see certain body language. Now that comes in as a visual signal to me. It goes to my brain, and it's processed in the same way as any other visual signal, so that it will then generate feeling, just as any other processed visual stuff, or auditory, or
smell even.
Particularly, I think, actually. And so, in that sense, we actually feel what that person is feeling.
Because we observe it, that body language goes to our insula,
our processing,
where it
now it goes to our visual processing system,
okay,
and then it goes to the insula.
Okay, and then the insula does its relief map thing,
yes,
and helps us actually feel what we're seeing the other person express.
That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's accurate, but I think it certainly is a reasonable explanation. Now, I really want to go on what happens in autism, because there is evidence that people are actually, when they measured the skin reductance messages on the sweat levels on the hand, they found that people with autism, although they can't respond to smiles or whatever it is, do actually feel them in their body. So there's a sort of blip when you do something, but they're not actually responding to it.
Okay,
why is it that autistic people
can't necessarily interpret their own visceral interoceptive messages? Yes.
And what we have to look at what people with autism are actually saying about this. I could feel the pee urge, but I didn't know what it meant, so she would wet herself. Or Hope says, I knew I was walking, but I couldn't feel I was walking.
Yes.
So there's something that's gone wrong. Either it is that their signals which reaching the brain are overwhelmed by anxiety, and there's a good deal of evidence that this can be actually
anxiety or another strong emotion.
Or another strong emotion. Or there's an actual break somewhere in the pathway between the...
So like in what that little boy says, my wiring's wrong.
The little boy who I was working with, he said, my head's not wired up properly.
My head's not wired up properly,
And he was right, and in a way I think it's a very good description of what's happening, although people may find it too painful. But it's not wired up in the same way, which would sort of put a smooth throughput. There are issues on the way.
Yes. Yes, there are issues on the way, there is interference, there is a lack of clarity about that message at some point.
Maybe an actual break.
Yeah.
Because, for example, we know that there's a break between the left brain and the right brain in about 40% of people with autism.
And we know this because of brain scans?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, can you summarise that?
It goes back to the processing of interoceptive messages in some ways being no different from the processing of other sensory messages, there is a break, there is a confusion, there is a miswiring, which means that somebody with autism
or an overload,
because the processing is either too much or too little, that gets in the way of an accurate idea of what I am feeling, what the person with autism is feeling, literally through their visceral organs, what the physical sensory feedback is telling them. That's a disconnect.
If we go back to the chapter on vision, the scan shows what happens, and if the overload is not corrected, which is on this side,
there's just so much more brain activity needed.
Well, no, it's not needed. It just fires like a Catherine wheel, basically. And when it's corrected, it's only the brain processing is only in the area where it should normally be. And the person is just flooded with the brain trying desperately to make sense of the...
So when I say needed, that's all that effort, that person is trying to make sense of the sensory input, and it's not necessarily working until there is something that comes between, and in this case it's the Erlen lenses, the coloured lenses, which helps to process the visual information.
Well, it cuts down on the in this case the visual input, which is actually causing the visual processing difficulty.
So it removes the difficulty. Less brain effort is needed to do the same visual exercise.
It's not so much less brain effort in the correct place.
Yes, oh okay.
One of the pieces of research which Sarah Garfinkel talks about is monitoring the heart. People with autism, actually, their heart is working, the rhythms are working, but they can't interpret them. They're not aware of them. And they find that making them aware of them is helping to reduce their anxiety. Well, in a recent New Scientist, it discusses an app. Now, this app is worn on a smartwatch, and it monitors the heartbeat, and it taps back the rhythm. And this makes it much easier for people to recognize their heart rhythm. People with autism are recognizing, and their stress level is coming down. But it also can monitor the person's heart level and reduce the rhythm as it goes back slower.
So the rhythm that is being tapped back is a slower rhythm.
And that has an impact, and that is reducing people's stress level. One of her findings was that slowing down the rate of the heart rhythm was helping to calm people. And this app, which has just been talked about, which is called Boost Me Up.
Boost Me Up.
Boost Me Up. And if you Google that, you get onto it. It will monitor heart level and will can be played back more smoothly, slowly, and so the person becomes calmer. Now, I don't think they haven't actually published anything which says we've tried this on people with autism, but I'd very much like to see it tried.
I think that's something that is being worked on.
It is in America, and they cost quite a bit. But I think it's something we need to look at in the future. Simply you have a smartwatch with an app which monitors your heart rate, slows it down, and plays it back at a slower rate.
Yes.
And that, with non-autistic person, it can be done so that they actually feel it, whereas an autistic person is not really
as aware
feeling it.
Yeah, because actually that's one of our strongest interoceptive messages, is our awareness of our own heartbeat. And most of the time we're not consciously aware of it. If I was to get up and do 50 star jumps, apart from collapsing, yes, I would be aware of my heartbeat. Sitting here, I'm not consciously aware of it, but somewhere that's being picked up.
Yes, but the interesting thing in Garfinkel's work is that the more aware people are of it, the more aware they are of their emotions.
I want to relate some of what we've been talking about to two things: empathy and emotional overload. Two things that we've spoken about a lot. Over the years, all of us have heard so often people with autism described as not having empathy. Oh, he's not empathetic because he's got autism. Some of the most empathetic people I know have got autism. It's nothing to do with that. And this, to me, our understanding of interoception finally gives us a way of explaining why somebody with autism might really struggle to understand what somebody else is feeling. If, as we're describing, that you've described people interpreting minute changes in body language, the size of pupils, maybe the tone of voice. So we're talking visual, we're talking sound, we're talking smell. That we're absorbing this information and processing it, which helps us understand how that person feels. If the person with autism, because of high anxiety or differences in brain function, are not getting that same clarity of message through those senses, it's not surprising that they can't understand how somebody is feeling, and they have to work out other ways of doing that, and that's what we see happening.
Yes, because the distortions can be, just take vision, the visual distortions can be very, very powerful. Some of them will, for example, have a black disc in front of their eyes. So Richard Maguire took photographs of a conference we were at and distorted them to show how he saw the lecture theatre, and actually he saw one or two chairs of the row in front, but the rest round it was all blurry. You can't pick up all these emotional sort of mini resonances.
So it's not to do with a lack of empathy; it's to do with a lack of receiving and processing the information in the same way.
Some of them are actually over-empathetic, and they describe themselves as such. And these are the people who go on to say that they have emotional overload.
Now that's something you've written a lot about, somebody maybe not liking praise and shying away from praise and being uncomfortable with praise, and literally in a school situation running away from having been told well done,
kicking the teacher,
or kicking the teacher. Okay, because they're having an extreme reaction,
painful reaction
to being praised. Now, again, this is something that the non-autistic amongst us can also relate to. We were talking earlier about the feeling of blushing. Somebody gives me a compliment and I blush. And that's a cue for you giving me a compliment, Phoebe, but never mind, you missed the cue. So somebody gives me a compliment and I blush, but I know enough as an adult to kind of process that and understand it, and it doesn't overwhelm me.
And put it in context.
But if what I got is that huge interoceptive burst of heat,
tsunami, that's what they describe.
So if I'm getting, somebody said, well done, Janet, and I've got this not just a blush, but that goes on this explosion of heat and discomfort to the point of pain, I've either got to attack the person who is causing it, stop them doing it anymore, and kicking them would be a pretty good way of stopping them doing it, or I've got to remove myself from it. And now, interoceptively, if we're thinking of that blush as an interoceptive message, and I can control that, but if I couldn't control that, that would be absolutely overwhelming. And again, any woman of a certain age watching this will be able to relate to that in terms of a menopausal hot flush, which can seem like a painful intrusion, that's something you can't do anything about, and we know how uncomfortable that is. We can absolutely relate to why praise can be painful. Absolutely. If we think about it as an interoceptive
that arouses
message.
Emotion, in fact, because
the emotion will be being felt physically.
I think we have talked about this possibly before, but even names calling somebody by their name
Yes.
can be an emotional event.
But it can, can't it? Being called out, we can think of that of being in class and somebody calling your name, and suddenly there's that focus on me, which is uncomfortable. And if we say that that's physical sensation, the interoceptive reaction is overwhelming, we understand why teachers maybe need to praise less in the classroom.
Well, they need to, if they need to note if the pupil, the student, is reacting badly to well done, they need to stop saying that.
Yes.
And
Richard McGuire, sorry.
Yes, Richard talks about it.
Yes, he talks about it would be more useful to, as you're walking away, to say, that went well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not direct, it's, yeah.
So to be indirect rather than direct. Emotion and sympathy are so different. Sympathy is a matter of analysis, of knowing, of cognition, whereas empathy is about feeling what the other person feels, aligning yourself, tuning yourself so closely into them that you do actually feel what they feel.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I do want to use something about being very precise right in the beginning. If I'm working with somebody with a very profound learning disability, when I reflect back to them their body language and the movement of their fingers and the angle of their head and even their blinking, and I'm being very precise, and their breathing, and I'm being as precise as I can about reflecting that back, that will help. I know now that our understanding of interoception means that I am actively helping that person.
You're confirming.
I'm confirming their own feelings
exactly.
by reflecting it back to them.
And if we don't confirm a person's feelings, then they lose their sense of self.
Well, this is it. So we know that intensive interaction helps somebody by just I'm using the word copy, by reflecting back to somebody as precisely as we can, we are helping their sense of self develop. Now, if I'm helping that person's sense of self develop, I'm also at the same time making myself processable, because I'm recognisable. What I'm doing is recognisable to that person. It's helping that person make the bridge between confirmed self and other. And without that bridge between confirmed self and other, there is no interaction, there is no possibility of communication.
And the person becomes socially more integrated.
Yes. So this
is
a bridge.
I mean, we can work out why it happens, but it also happens in practice.
Well, that's the point.
Their lives change.
Yeah, and I think this is a really exciting thing. We've known this, we've been talking about it, we've been doing it week in, week out for donkey's years, the practice of responding to somebody's body language, echoing it back, reflecting it, responding in a communicative way is building that bridge between self and other, and it works and it works and it works and it carries on working, and it enables that person to carry on exploring the social and communicative world. And for me, for people who have been doubtful about why and think it's a bit of snake oil, I'm sure that's been said to you over the years, it's certainly been said to me, there is kind of like scientific reasoning. Now, there always has been, but our knowledge of mirror neurons 15 years ago, I think, revolutionised our understanding of why intensive interaction is so useful. And again, this to me knits together what you've been saying for such a long time, is we have to understand somebody's sensory processing issues. We have to understand sensory processing issues, because without that understanding, the way we are reflecting and responding to somebody's body language might be being interpreted in a way that we can't know, and is getting in the way. So we have to understand the sensory processing first.
Absolutely.
And to me, the more research there is about interoception, the more power to our arms about this is why this works. If we're supporting somebody on the autistic spectrum who is struggling with the concept of relating to other people, if we're supporting somebody with a profound and multiple learning disability who is struggling with the sense that they exist, we have to take into consideration how they're processing the world. I think that's a really exciting proof here that we have that, these have to knit together.